My understanding would be essentially that it's either physical or psychological acts or harm or suffering against a person of the opposite sex.
Gender-based violence is really violence that is directed to one gender by another gender. And we see it more often that it's the male gender directing this violence towards the female gender, be it physically, verbally, and so forth. So in the maritime sector, I wouldn't say I have heard of it being directed physically, but perhaps verbally. That's where the concern may be from my perspective, from what I've heard and observed.
My understanding is any harassment, discrimination, either acts of either verbally, sexually, or physically upon females, discriminating them within an industry. From in the maritime industry, being a veteran seafarer myself, I have seen it happen when I was still a cadet, where when females early started coming into sea to join the maritime sector, it was quite frowned upon at the time, if I may say so myself. You found very few females at the time coming to sea, and you didn't find them staying long at sea because once they qualified, they would generally leave the sea environment as it was not conducive to a female. That said, though, there's been a lot of work done since those years, as you can slowly start seeing an influx of females within the maritime industry, and you're starting to see them stay a lot longer on board ships and pursuing their careers within the sector.
Yeah, gender-based violence, the way I understand it, or I was made to understand it, was mainly where the male dominant figure, if I were to be specific, were to take advantage of the powers that they may have in terms of proceeding with the women, or to basically, I won't say abuse alone, but there is a lot of other factors that violence can be made. It could be physically, it could be mentally, or at times emotionally, especially working with male dominant industry like ours in the maritime. You find that the emotional part, after a long time away from home, becomes the key factor either in uniting a team or separating a team. And where there is a woman who is naturally, emotionally very either intelligent, sensitive, as well as at times they sway their feelings towards the emotion side. So that's the area where I find that most of the violence has been affected, or that's where it has happened in our industry.
So for me, gender-based violence is violence against somebody of another sex, right? But it's not just violence in terms of physical violence. For me, it can be intimidation and harassment. It can be psychological violence as well, in the matter, because they all do the same damage to any seafarer that is out there at sea. It's something that's not been given enough attention to in the past. We've always thought that seafarers are this tough bunch of people that can weather any storm. But then at the end of the day, a seafarer is exactly the same as you and me. They have feelings, they are emotional, they get affected by this kind of violence as well. And in the end, it leads to a different kind of epidemic out there, and that is suicides of seafarers. And we've had a number of those happening around the globe, specifically or as a result of gender-based violence. And it's not a topic that we talk about out there. So for me, it's about making that topic visible. It's about making sure that everybody understands that it can happen to anybody. It can even happen to a male. And it's happened before on a male. And I'm not talking here about male, female. I'm talking male on male violence can also occur out there. And that is also in a form of physical harassment, because these days it's everybody that goes to sea. So that is what it entails for me. It's the violence that seafarers suffer. And we forget sometimes that it's not just when they are at sea. Those seafarers, they go home as well. and they can get influenced by gender-based violence at home as well. So it's both home and at sea. And they can also be the people who inflict violence on others when they go home because of the conditions that they work at sea, because it's the harsh conditions. So for me, that is what gender-based violence is all about.
Yeah, much of my observations have been through articles that I have read. Personally, on vessels that I've sailed on, I have not seen anyone who has complained of being a victim of gender-based violence. But from the articles that I have read, it has been concerning that there was one that made quite headline news. It was of one of the cadets who fell over the side. And the articles from the Sunday newspapers reported that it may have its roots as from gender-based violence. So that was quite concerning for me, quite scary even. Quite scary even that how if these articles are true, what they're reporting is true, is there something that can be done? What will be the consequences to those who subjected this poor cadet to that treatment? You see, so yes, it's quite concerning. They were quite concerning, those articles that I've read. They were worrisome.
Maybe I'll just mention a few, because of time. Mainly harassment. There were issues, especially on like myself, who was a senior manager on board the ships. You find that the issue is one maybe seafarer having physical contact with a female seafarer, not in a manner or in a mutual way, but sometimes jokingly. But you find that particular interaction was not to the liking of one party. And we had to basically start working on those issues. And most of the time, it's a male who sometimes initiates this thing, not because a woman wanted to. And it's difficult at times when you are in a work environment, you want to be working with colleagues peacefully. In most cases, that peace is disturbed now because the male or some of us have done a little bit further from there. At times we think because someone smiles at you, laughs at you, there is a certain message they are trying to portray. And that is the issue with us, where we don't really allow the process of a colleague, a team to work. We just start thinking more than that. And I understand on a male perspective, we are hunters. If you see anything that's possible, you want to go as far as you can in case anything would happen, which is at times we have to remind our seafarers. We have to sometimes take some action, which is not a nice action to control that. So, yeah.
I started at sea in the 90s, and that's sort of mid-90s is when the first women started coming to sea, sort of early to mid-90s. And I recall that, prior to them arriving on board, there was a lot of discussion on board the ship about how this was not going to work. They wouldn't be able to deal with this. Physically, this is a tough career, and they wouldn't be able to step up to the plate, essentially. There was quite a lot of sort of boundaries put in when the first ones joined. And I must say, in the years that I was at sea, and the ships that I served on, I was not aware of any issues in terms of gender-based violence. I ended up sailing with as a chief mate, and my opposite number, because we used to share the ship, so I would work a couple of months, she would work a couple of months, was a woman, and one would swap over, and I was certainly not aware of any issues. But I think it's a very, very fine line, and it depends very, very much on who's on board and who the master is, the captain of the ship, because the way he deals or treats those on board, and how he can control the narrative in terms of how women are treated on board. And if he doesn't nip anything in the bud that he sees happening, and it can be subtle stuff. It can just be that psychological brushing off and those inappropriate comments that people make. And if that's not stopped immediately, then of course it can escalate. So I think the almost the most important person on the ship is obviously the master, followed by the chief engineer on the engineering department.
Gender-based violence, in my experience, is something that is quite bad within the industry and in society. It is quite rife. You see it on the news, you see it in society, especially in South Africa. It is quite a big problem that we currently are having. It is also an issue that you see manifesting within the maritime industry, especially on ships where females are isolated on board with large and predominant male figures on board, where you'll have 2 females in a crew of 20. So it does creep its head and it does show itself.
So in my experience, what I've had, I'm married to a female seafarer. We met each other in 1992. We went to sea together. And I've seen firsthand what can happen to people out there who are not different to others. There always used to be this thing about a male-dominated environment, and men cannot tolerate anybody else, and they were not acceptable to females coming into sea. And the things that we have seen out there, and perhaps I myself have never been open about the stuff that happened out there. When you stand up for somebody that needs protection, you get attacked sometimes. And those are situations that I've been involved in, where you stand up for what is right and other people don't like what you're saying. Females get exposed to certain things that happens at sea because. In my experience, I've seen men run around naked. And we have wives on board ships as well. They would get drunk, they'd run around naked, they would expose themselves unnecessarily to wives, even kids, with their mothers and that sort of thing as well. And it seems like this pandemic just grew from there, to such an extent that IMO now is trying to figure out how to deal with this pandemic that is called gender-based violence, because they are promoting more and more females in terms of going to sea, to create more equality out there for our seafarers.
I would say predominantly females. I'm not ruling out that it could happen vice versa, but I would say within my experience, you found that every time on the skid list, which is almost like a document sent to the ship of the upcoming crew changes, there would be a lot of excitement on board a vessel if they see a female coming to join. Whether they've seen the female or not, it created a space. And that has to change, I believe. Yes, the environment at the time, guys would be stuck out at sea with hardly any port access for 6 months, 9 months, but it still doesn't justify the actions or reactions and the treatment that the females would be subjected to at times, whether slight, whether it's implied, or whether it's the guys becomes aggressive at the end. But it really, you felt that as a male cadet joining a vessel for my first time, I would be sent to, I think I joined in Abu Dhabi, when I was the only cadet where females would have to be grouped in pairs as a strategy that when they get on board, they have a buddy system, which is something that for male cadets or male counterparts, they were never subjected to that, or they never felt the need for that. And I think that is quite wrong, and that is something that we need to change, where I think the same feelings of security, reassurance needs to also apply to the females or to parents sending their female cadets out at sea for a period of 4 to 6 months?
I think it's perhaps twofold. I think it is the men's attitudes towards women definitely comes into play, but I think also, you know, especially on cargo vessels as opposed to passenger vessels, you know, a ship is a fairly large structure, and it's got a lot of different places, and it doesn't have very many people on board. You know, generally the crew is sitting around 20 these days, and you know, essentially it's equivalent to a small 5-story building. So there's a lot of empty space where you will find only 1 or possibly 2 people. So unfortunately, I think that creates an opportunity for gender-based violence to be to happen, but outside anyone else's eyes, because nobody else is around.
At times, we are human. And I'll tell you the truth. Both parties, not all the time it's a female side that gets affected. The male too as well. But who do male report to? Would you tell me that this particular woman has been approaching me in this way and I'm confused how to explain this information and process it in the quickest of time, and I'm not happy or comfortable with it? I know for a fact there were women who would come into your room, into your cabin in the wrong hours of the day. And they are not dressed in a formal way where they are at work. They could be coming for any other help outside of your work. And that message can be decoded in a different way. Yes, but a male cannot come back to us and say, this is the problem. And that abuse takes a male a long time, because once that woman has gone, the male is thinking continuously, what I should have done. Did I have to move? Did I have to catch it right there? What? It's difficult. And these situations sometimes are not being brought by the male. So yes, the male do suffer at times, but they never talk about those things. We only talk when alone, and it's a casual talk that, hey, the bed was in my cabin. Then what did you do? And it's a case of, I just did it. Hey, you slow. Yes, but had he acted and the female didn't like, it turns. So who is right, who is wrong? I believe in one way or the other, it cannot be addressed, particularly at sea where the environment is neutral. The ship is just neutral. It just needs both parties to act considerably to one another. So,
you know, in South Africa, we've had a vessel that was, it was entirely crewed with females on board to showcase that as South Africa, we take the fairer sex serious and we want to create those equal opportunities for them. And as a result of that, we also need to make sure that they are protected when they go out there. They need to know of the different kinds of dangers that happens out there. We need to train our seafarers to deal with those kind of things. I remember when I was at sea, I didn't know how to deal with human elemental stuff. I mean, when somebody came to me and they were crying, you know, as a seafarer, you're like, really? Seriously? You know, man up. You know, you don't get taught how to deal with the human element. So for me, that is what we have to deal with. We have to start at the basics and work our way up to get rid of the scourge of gender-based violence. South Africa has had its own experiences. We've had a couple of cases now that we've had to deal with where sex is being used to, you know, force somebody to sign off a record book. You know, that is unacceptable.
I think that, you know, certainly in the maritime sphere, it really, unfortunately, completely depends on the master of the vessel. And I think, you know, perhaps there should be a scope where masters start having regular meetings with some of their crew members just to try and get a feel if there's anything happening that shouldn't happen. Of course, the problem is if the master himself is the problem. So companies really need to have a sort of a reporting system on board that can sort of that's available to anyone who feels that gender-based violence is taking place. So even if someone else observes it happening and the victim isn't comfortable in reporting it, that there's that sort of framework either on board or back towards the company and the vessel management to say, look, there's something that's not happening there. And I think it's also training, because I think there's seafarers or men don't always realize that what they're saying or what they or the actions that they do are actually perceived as, psychologically degrading. For men, often something is just said in jest, but the impact of what's said in jest on the other person is quite significant. And I think there needs to be discussion around that. That wolf whistles across the room are not always or at any time appropriate, because how does the other person perceive it? I think there should be a no tolerance approach, and I think a lot of the gender-based violence in terms of what someone of the opposite sex can and cannot do is completely misplaced. I think in the maritime sector, it's open to all. It's open to both sectors, both sexes. Women can do just as much as men in the sector, and there's nothing holding them back. But gender-based violence needs to be stopped, and people need to take responsibility and call it out when they see it.
I do believe that SAMSA should be taking the lead. Not necessarily that it should be the only player in this, the only institution that takes gender-based violence seriously, perhaps through these seminars and so forth. I believe, though, that SAMSA should be taking the lead in this. We are the authority in the Maritime Authority in South Africa, so anything that has to do with issues that affect seafarers, seamen, we should be championing their cause. So seafarers, those that have experienced this, need to see us taking the lead in this, see us taking it seriously. So such seminars are quite important, I do believe, that the industry should see that SAMSA is quite serious about this. It has noticed it and is aware of it and is doing something about it.
No, I think it is quite a very good initiative. I'm well in support of it. I think it's coming at the right time. And I think it is something that the industry will really learn from. I think the education initiative, the lifting the profile of the subject matter is quite important, and to create an environment where females can discuss or raise concerns when they do arise. I think we need to create that space. We need to create avenues where if it is experienced or perpetuated out at sea, then there is a form where the seafarers' welfare is looked after and initiatives are taken to address the matter.
I think this is an extremely useful start. I think the more messages that get out there, the stronger the narrative of change will be. So I fully support what SAMSA is doing in this regard. I think it's a great start from our side.
This is the first seminar that we've ever had in South Africa about this very specific topic. And as you recall, even our president is talking about gender-based violence. Because it's such a hidden topic in the maritime industry, the big focus of this seminar is about creating awareness. For SAMSA to be effective, we need to create awareness. We need to tell people that this is not right. And then we need to tell people also how we can help them. We need to make this disease visible, then we can address it. And then we can put the laws in place to ensure that people who transgress those laws, that harm other seafarers on the basis of their sex, can be held accountable. And we can prosecute those guys if there's a need to do so.
We couldn't wait for more. we needed this beginning. There is this gender-based violence. Let us be clear. Violence is not about having harm to someone where it can be physical or something I can see. Mentally, women in times cannot understand that they have violated a man's brain or a man's emotional side or even physical side. I'm sorry to put this way, having a tail in front of you is so showing at times that it takes away your pride. If a woman sparks it, it has no brain. And amongst the men, they will tell you that once the tail starts moving, you have no control of it. And women knows how to trigger it, but they don't know how much damage they can do to a man. Hence, this seminar is the best because it is here now to make us aware, both women and men, so that when we move forward, we have a certain way. They must have a way of approaching a man-dominated environment. The same male, that's how they will do as well. So if we can work on that, this is the seminar to do.